Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
A glorious Thursday morning to you, my dears. Today, excitingly, I have more Skinwalker stories from Ashkey 90. I do hope you enjoy these. You know I do. Werewolf in Three Turkey. This happened to my cousin who was visiting our grandmother on the Navajo Nation reservation. He was what you would call an urban Navajo, born and raised in Phoenix, and rarely visited the res. He was raised in the church and was aware of certain Navajo taboos and folklore, but didn't heed any or abide by any. Him and his older brother used to stay at our grandmother's during the summer and help out with chores and livestock. They call it sheep camp. However, sheep camp was just a summer lodge or cabin in the mountains where you took the sheep during the summer months to graze. Being from the city, I guess they just liked the term sheep camp, when in reality it was just our grandmother's permanent residence. Like most rural residences on the reservation, old automobiles and appliances that no longer worked piled up in the front yard due to a lack of transportation or waste management options. There was an obsolete refrigerator from the 80s on the far left side of my grandmother's porch, and a broken-down muscle car from decades earlier. The car was more of a skeleton, a forgotten remnant, that rested about 30 feet off to the left, in perfect eye line straight from the porch. The model of the car I cannot remember, but the windows had all been busted out and the upholstery weathered and cracked. The desert sand reclaimed most of it. The tires were shredded and half buried. If you grew up on the res, this served as a derelict jungle gym or playground. My mother and I had decided to visit my grandma one summer afternoon when I was 12 years old, the same age as my cousin. We greeted everyone upon our arrival, and our grandma fed us. My cousin asked if I wanted to take a walk to the canyon and told me he had something to tell me with urgency. As soon as we were out of earshot of any of the adults or his older brother, he told me something had happened earlier that day, around 5:30 a.m. Although it was summer, in the Arizona temperate desert, it is easily many degrees colder at night and early mornings. He told me he was awoken by the urge to relieve himself. The sky was dark blue before the dawn. He was half asleep, and it was too cold to run all the way to the outhouse. No inside plumbing, so he continued to say he darted to the left to pee behind an old refrigerator off the porch. His eyes were half closed and his mind still a bit hazy from just waking up. Then he hears the distinct sounds of something jagged and sharp scratching in long succession on metal, accompanied with the heightening whimpering of a sheepdog. His eyes opened wide, and he tried to scan the horizon to locate the origin of the hurt sheepdog. Initially, he thought he saw the dog trapped in the car, but there were no windows or glass obstructing the dog's escape from the wreckage. He witnessed the dog clawing and scratching to fight its way out of the window frame of the driver's side, its front paws clawing at the outer shell of the driver's door, making the sound of nails on a chalkboard. He finished urinating and dazedly took one step off the porch to help the dog out of the car. Suddenly he freezes in his tracks as a cold, wicked laugh rips through the early dawn air. His eyes immediately fixate on where the laugh originated from, inside the car. He rubs his eyes and focuses his gaze on the dog, and his eyes follow along the dog's torso. And then he sees something that has arms and claws wrapped around the waist of the dog, preventing it from escaping. At this point, the sun had inched and crept over the mesa, and turned the sky from a pale blue to a pale yellow. The pale yellow light revealed that the driver's side of the car is completely covered in smeared blood. He jolts back inside and bolts the door behind him. He doesn't tell anyone because he was paralyzed from fear. Fear that if he talked about it, nothing would stop it from busting in the door and killing him, his brother, and our grandma. I inquired about what it looked like, or if he even saw what he had been holding the dog against its will. He said it looked like a werewolf, but a sickly werewolf with mange. He noted that it was hairy, but you could see almost dry, cracking gray skin underneath. He said that before he ran, he slouched down to see what was holding the dog inside of the car, and whatever it was, grinned. Its wicked smile was filled with sharp, jagged teeth, beaming from side to side. In all honesty, I thought he was lying to me and trying to scare me, thinking I was some dumb, uncivilized reser who would believe a werewolf tale. We spent some time in the canyon playing on boulders and throwing rocks into the small stream. I had all but forgotten what he shared with me until we made our way back to my grandmother's house. That's when he asked if I wanted to see the scene of the crime. I was skeptical at the time until I walked up to the car in question. I couldn't believe it. There were tufts of bloody, multicolored dog fur caught in the window frame, and bloody paw prints and smears on the outside of the driver's door. There were long scratch marks from the dog everywhere, not sharp enough to cut through the metal, but enough to make a slight indent, as if the nails were scratching down with so much pressure that the protein from the nails, or whatever nails are made of, buckled and gave way, filed down on the metal. I stood there in amazement and fear. All we did was throw dirt on the blood markings, and I haven't spoken of it until now. Side note, the sheepdog wasn't murdered. We spent all late afternoon looking for her. The dog was female. We later found her under an abandoned manufactured home on the property. She was afraid to come out for a couple of weeks, so my cousin said he always brought her food and water for the remainder of the summer break. Interesting, but uneventful nursing home incidences. I will describe 2 incidences that occurred at a nursing home facility, as told by the retired former director of said nursing home. After the retirement of this individual from almost a lifelong career in this position, they decided to relocate off the Navajo res. This nursing home was located in a very rural, small town on the Navajo Nation. The retired director had become a very close family friend, and upon the ending of an extended visit, this person decided to fully disclose some details about 2 separate incidences that occurred during their time on the res. It seemed to be very last minute, as if the person was unsure of sharing or was scared of sharing. Halfway through saying goodbye and preparing for our departure, the family friend said, "Do you want to hear some of my Skinwalker encounters?" The nursing home was very understaffed, simply because in a rural town, there were so many unqualified candidates. This meant the director was almost always on call or on site. The first incident was almost uneventful compared to the second. One late night while on the site, the nurses began to complain about smelling something rotten. For some reason, they had figured something such as a carcass had been disposed of in the dumpster at the facility by a community member illegally. The director called the security guard to investigate the strange smell. The security guard also made rounds at the nearby hospital. The security guard decided to patrol the grounds of the facility and enlist the help of 1 male nurse and 1 female nurse on duty. All three began walking towards the dumpster, which was located in the back of the building, near the loading dock. The building was U-shaped and surrounded by a 7-foot-high fencing. The director swears by the 7-foot height because they oversaw the installation of the perimeter fencing from start to finish. With flashlights in hand, they come upon something or someone crouched over partially naked butt covered in white clay. It let out a loud laugh, almost like the cry of a hyena, but laughing. Without picking up speed, this thing goes from being crouched to clearing the 7-foot fencing without taking 2 steps. 1 step, 2 step, cleared the fence. The director tells the security guard and nurses to forget about it and not worry because whatever it was no longer in their jurisdiction. The director recalls them being very shaken up and almost in a state of shock. The best way to calm them down was to tell them to forget about it. Another late night. The majority of cameras don't work or are not connected to anything. It is the reservation, meaning many things don't work properly. The director says that the cameras that do work aren't connected to any type of recording system. So there's no playback. It's more of a live feed situation with no controls. One late night around 3 a.m., the director and a few of the nurses on staff notice a little boy wandering around the courtyard. The little boy is half naked and described as being ashy and wearing a loincloth. 2 of the nurses and the director approach him and corner him so that he doesn't get away. He doesn't resist. They begin questioning him, but the boy looks confused. One of the Navajo nurses starts speaking to him in Navajo. He finally responds. She asks him what is his name, how old is he, where is he from, how did he get there, and what he is doing, etc. The boy tells her his first name, and that he's 11 years old, and that he's from a nearby rural community, that his skin walked to the nursing home to see his grandpa, who raised him and taught him how to skinwalk, and that he missed his grandpa. After revealing all of this, the Navajo nurse tells them she doesn't wish to communicate with him any further, fearing that it will make her ill. This is not a heartfelt moment. If you're a Navajo, you know that the boy and his grandpa must have committed some type of sinister atrocity, ritualistic in nature, to become what they are. The Navajo lady realized this and becomes afraid of the boy. Fast forward a couple of months later, the grandfather passes away from natural causes. The director of the nursing home must assume the duty of contacting the next of kin. During this endeavor, the director finds out from community members that the grandson was found dead in a ditch a week after his grandfather's passing. Skinwalker sighting in Haystack, New Mexico. This story was told to me by my brother. It occurred during the early 2000s. Smartphones had not been invented yet, so only crappy flip phones with sketchy cellular service. My brother was an electrician, a journeyman. He was employed in a small border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup is situated on the cusp of the Navajo Nation reservation and the area called the Checkerboard Area, due to the fact that there are designated plots of land that are considered a part of the res, and the next plot of land is not, like a checkerboard. There's a large population of multiple tribes in the area, such as Navajo, Pueblo, Zuni, etc. One night, my brother and one of his co-workers, who was Chinese American, were the only 2 employees on call. In case of an emergency, a power line goes down or something catastrophic happens like that in the middle of nowhere, outside of Gallup, towards the Continental Divide, He received the call in the early morning hours, shortly after 1 a.m. The co-worker had recently become the father of a newborn, but desperately needed the hours. My brother calls him and they agree to meet up at the company stockyard. My brother waits about an hour or so. His co-worker still hasn't shown. It is strict company protocol to never go on jobs alone, always in pairs or more, due to the hazardous nature of high-voltage lines and electricity in general. My brother's co-worker calls and tells him that something is wrong with the newborn and he needs to take his wife to the ER. He'll meet up with him on site. Also, another injunction. They're strictly instructed to show up to the job site in the company vehicle, which are equipped with tools required for the job and all that. My brother understands and doesn't want his co-worker to be docked pay or written up for violating company policy. Against his better judgment, he heads out alone. The job site is quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The power lines span across the vast desert, with red rock mesas in the far distance. In the daylight, at least. At nighttime, it's pitch black New Mexican desert. Only dirt roads and no houses or streetlights for miles. None could be seen along the entire horizon. He waits as long as he cares to wait for his co-worker. He figures he'll assess the damage on his own, and by the time his co-worker shows up, he'll have a solution. He suits up and begins crawling the tall wooden pole. The company truck is parked facing towards the pole, the high beams illuminating the base and subsequent foreground. He reaches the top of the pole. Some time passes as he tries to calibrate the issue or solve the problem. The power outage. Something on the ground below him he catches in the corner of his periphery. He looks down in disbelief and shock as his mind tries to make sense of what he's seeing. He described it as a man crawling on all fours, wearing the skin of a coyote, the skin draped along its back with the limbs like dead weight dangling towards the ground. He watches as the creature patrols the area. He said he witnessed the Skinwalker encircle the truck with smaller and smaller orbits, until eventually it stood up on 2 feet and peered inside the window of the truck on the driver's side. He described the motions of the Skinwalker and said it was moving as if it was confused as to what was going on or where the driver of the truck was. From his vantage point, he could infer that the Skinwalker was male, was painted with black paint and white clay. Then on the horizon, he could see headlights. His co-worker was en route. The Skinwalker also noticed this, not figuring out that he was up on the power line pole. As his partner approached closer, the Skinwalker runs off into the dark on all fours. The rest of the trouble call was uneventful in regards to the Skinwalker. Skinwalker Trap. I heard this story from my sister's co-worker and trusted friend of many years. They've known each other since kindergarten. In small, rural reservation communities, it is not uncommon to know someone throughout your lifetime due to limited choices of schools. You basically go to school with the same generation of kids from kindergarten until you graduate high school. This story isn't as detailed or in-depth as many of the other stories that people have shared with me because my sister's friend explained it very nonchalantly and quickly in passing. She stopped by to pick up cookware that she was borrowing from my sister. Anyway, my sister tells her friend to tell the story to me. It takes her a moment of contemplation to share it. She said that her cousins, who are twin brothers, were always fearless ever since they were kids. They were hard to scare and would never cry or show emotions as far back as she could remember. She continued to say that they would always play freeze tag and kick the can outside after the sun went down, even though their grandmother would tell them not to. They would spend the night on the trampoline with no tent, just sleeping bags during the summer, etc. They lived out towards Spider Rock. When the pavement turns to dirt road, the dirt road that becomes Three Turkey and eventually Old Sawmill Road. For a few weeks, something kept coming into their family's property, causing the dogs to howl and bark, and the cattle and sheep to get flustered and frantic. It started to get the brothers annoyed and territorial, to say the least. She said they fashioned a sort of tactical weighted netting out of wires and heavy lead pipes. One of the nights, the brothers decided to wait out and stake out whatever has been harassing their animals and property. She said they prepared themselves by taking bitter herb medicine and rubbing black ash from a ceremony fire on the top of their heads. They situated themselves above the sheep shed, giving them the best vantage point, allowing for the weighted netting to fall directly on top. They didn't have to wait long. Near the property line, hopping like a frog out of the cedar trees and sagebrush, came the Skinwalker, with a thud, thud, thud in the soft dirt. They waited quietly as the dogs barked and stayed in front of the doorway to the house. They said it hopped like a disjointed frog or some kind of animal they never saw in the wild. Soon enough, it made its way towards the sheep corral. The sheep got frightened and gathered on the far side of the corral, the furthest point in the entrapped space away from the Skinwalker. At this point, she said bluntly and matter-of-factly. Then they threw the netting down on top of it and captured it. They jumped down on top of it as well. No weird inhuman screams or shrills. Just a very human man yelling for them to let him go in Navajo. She said that they told her that the Skinwalker smelled like roadkill or rotten grease. She said they called the Navajo Nation police and stayed with the entrapped Skinwalker until the unit arrived, which on the res was a while. The cops loaded the putrid-smelling culprit into the back of the police SUV. The entire time, the culprit was just screaming to let him go home, and he didn't do anything. The cops were Navajo and realized upon arriving what the person was based slowly on how the person was dressed and smelling. Dressed in tattered furs and rotten grease and black paint smeared all over their body. I asked then what happened. She said the cops drove away with the person and told the family they were going to do a full write-up and all that kind of protocol. However, the family never received a copy of the case or case number in the mail, like the cops assured them they would. I asked her then what, and she said, I don't know what happened after that. She supposed they held the suspect in the trunk tank away from everyone else and released them with all the other Delanis drunkards the next morning. Skinwalker reveal. This is a personal story and experience. Let me start by providing a few details to establish the backstory. I have contemplated whether or not to reveal this story since the day it happened. According to Navajo kinship, your cousins are legitimately considered your sisters and brothers, depending on their gender, of course. So forgive me if the term cousin brother seems a bit janky. I grew up next door to my cousin brother, who was less than a year my senior. We did everything together. In high school, he became a popular basketball player, but a mediocre academic. You know that old song and dance. He was a light-skinned Navajo, clear complexion, athletic, very handsome and popular, etc. I was enrolled into kindergarten a year after he was, due to my late birth date, making him a junior, 11th grade, and myself a sophomore, 10th grade, when the story occurred. If you come from the res, you know how important basketball is. You're basically a celebrity. Going to high school on a dry res usually meant that getting alcohol was very, very difficult. So even high school parties were very limited in terms of alcohol consumption, meaning no one built up a strong alcohol tolerance. Everyone was a lightweight because the drinking was infrequent, and even when alcohol was available, you had to return to your parents' home, so most people stayed relatively sober. Our older sister was attending university off the res and invited both of us brothers out for her upcoming spring break. Our spring break was 2 weeks, and during our second week of break, her spring break would commence. Therefore, during our 2-week visit to her on-campus apartment, she was in class the first week, leaving us to our own devices. He quickly made friends with some people our sister introduced him to, and began going to parties almost every night. I went to a few, but left early on most occasions. I didn't drink or smoke during high school. One day while my sister was in class, I slept past 1 p.m., Being a teenage boy, it wasn't hard. And my brother stumbled into the apartment from the party he attended the night before. He was very intoxicated, the kind of heavily intoxicated that you can smell the alcohol coming out of his pores, and the smell of alcohol lofting off his bad breath and clothes. He finds a handle of vodka that was chilling in the fridge and begins drinking that. It isn't long before he's crying and having a complete meltdown. To this day, I get chills thinking about what came out of his mouth that late afternoon. He was basically crying and almost incoherent, but was adamant that he needed to get something off his chest and confess something. I'm there listening, but still a bit annoyed because I was left to babysit him. I figured he was going to say he was cheating on his girlfriend or got arrested last night or something frivolous. This is not verbatim, but what he said was the gist of his confession. He began to confess that he is a Skinwalker. I tell him to shut up and that he's just effed up. He gets angry because I'm not listening correctly. His angry outburst spurs me to no longer interfere and just listen to what he has to say. He repeats himself and says, I am a Skinwalker. I killed my Nolly, paternal grandmother. He continues to say that around the time we were in junior high, 7th and 8th grade is when he began practicing bad medicine to become a Skinwalker. I don't remember if I asked for an explanation in pure disbelief or what. But he continues to say that one summer evening when he was out after dark, shooting hoops alone, a Skinwalker was watching him from the roof of an empty hogan. By empty hogan, I mean vacant hogan, uninhabited by any family members, but was centrally located and used solely for ceremonial purposes, blessing way ceremonies, prayers, and puberty ceremonies, aka good medicine. Under the one streetlight, the stage is set. The ball ricochets off the rim and rolls past the hogan. He runs after it, frantically trying to pick up the basketball before it rolls into bullhead stickers. He said it was then that he noticed he was being watched. He said he saw the man. He said a man, with no further inclination of name or who the man was in relation to him, crouched on all fours and then crawling around the hogan roof, following him. The man offers to teach him to become powerful and successful just like him. I could only surmise that being young and impressionable, without thinking of consequences, is what launched him down the path of bad medicine. He stumbled over his own words and key details. Then he admits that there was an irrefutable trade. Someone he loved dearly must be sacrificed or exchanged for power. At some point, he looks me in the eye and says something to the effect of, "Didn't you ever notice as kids? I was always missing a lot or not around." He confides in me that the man, his Skinwalker teacher, would come during the night and take him away to teach him. To where I have no clue. He never said. I refute his claim at the risk of him having another angry outburst. I was trying to keep his volume low because I didn't want the campus security to show up and our sister to get in trouble. That he murdered his Nali. She was killed in a vehicular accident. A semi-truck hit her vehicle straight on. She died immediately. I tell him it was an accident. He said him and his teacher performed evil chants and bad medicine, causing the accident to happen. That was his final test and subsequent initiation. I believe during all of this he was blacked out. He passed out eventually before my sister returns. I never tell her. We leave him in the apartment and go hang out with her friends. He wakes up the next day not remembering anything and acting like nothing ever happened. Growing up traditional, I was told all my life by my elders and parents, who were told by medicine men, that if a Skinwalker reveals their identity, or their identity becomes known, they will get sick and die. This thought haunted my mind for a long time after this. I believed that my cousin would get terminally ill or become a fatality in a car accident for revealing everything he revealed. To be honest, I thought that his Skinwalker pack or clan or whatever you want to call them would retaliate and start casting bad medicine on me for even knowing. Weeks became months and months became years. Nothing happens. To this day, my cousin brother is healthy and still handsome with a small family of his own. We aren't as close anymore. I wouldn't say estranged because there was no falling out or bad blood. I went to college and came back a different person. Why didn't anything happen to him? Maybe he was lying, but why would his story be as detailed as it was, even as blacked out as he was? Why would a normal person want to admit to killing their loved one? I don't know the answers to any of these questions. So quoth this raven. Well, my darlings, there are some wonderful, authentic Skinwalker stories for you. Thank you so much to Ashkey90 for allowing me to share his stories. Thank you all so much for coming to visit. It means the world to me. And special thanks to my Patreon supporters, Ermin, Darren and Jennifer, Laura, Mutant Artificial Intelligence, Tabby Cat, and of course, special thanks to Charlotte Emerson and Cortez Williams.